Good day, everyone. It feels amazing to take the stage here at Q House with this brilliant group of people. Welcome to the third session of the day. I'm Güray Oskay. I am the Director of Architectural Design at Atelier. And this session is brought to you by Atelier and Gehl together with the amazing contributions of my good friend, Jeff Risom here. And because Jeff is significantly more knowledgeable in urban design than me, I will be the moderator asking questions and Jeff will be on the speaking end. This session is called Leveraging AI for Smarter Urban Design, and we could not have dreamt of a better lineup. To my left is Jeff Risom. Jeff is partner and chief innovation officer at Gehl, a fellow Q company. His career figuratively stands on the intersection of innovation and urban design, transforming the way cities are shaped by making public life an intentional driver for design. Next up, we have Claudia Dobles Camargo, an architect and urbanist. Claudia has years of expertise in urban mobility, social housing, community engagement, and climate change. She has led high-impact projects such as the electric passenger train, Green Climate Fund, and water supply projects in her homeland of Costa Rica. And she's focusing her research now at MIT on climate change and AI. We have Victor Santiago Pineda. Victor is an urbanist, an author, a scholar, an entrepreneur. He's the founder of Inclusive Cities Lab, World Enabled, and the Pineda Foundation. The complete list of his titles and accolades pretty much take all of our time slot for today, so I will stick to these few. But he has done mountains of work for accessibility and inclusivity. And our final speaker is Liz Henderson. Liz is a catastrophe and climate risk specialist with 20 years of experience in risk analytics for insurance carriers. She's the global head of climate risk advisory at E.ON. Her background is in mathematics and philosophy, and she's from the world of insurance, which is perfect because when it comes to risk analysis, who better, right? So, COP is merely about climate. It is about our impact on our surroundings and its reciprocal impact on our lives. It is about cause and effect, it is about causality, it is about the consequences of our actions, and those consequences are in dire need of our attention. The whole ordeal started more than a century ago with the Industrial Revolution and the growth of urbanization and its toll on our quality of life, and has had a very steep curve, and we need an even steeper curve downwards to undo all the damage in a very short amount of time. Over the years, we have identified many thresholds based on scientific data, but when the change is always incremental, it is so easy to ignore on a day-to-day basis. A couple of years ago, however, we passed one of the very serious thresholds. As of 2020, the human design constructs, materials, products, buildings overweigh the entire Earth's biomass. That is one significant scientific truth. Without question, the built environment has the central role in the situation we are in today, and change needs to happen. Which is great, because that's why we're together. We're advocates of change. It's what Q stands for. We cherish the role of design and creativity to induce change. Of course, leaving behind the dogmatic view of design as mere form and function, to us it's about form and function and behavioral change. Not only designing physical spaces, but creating the space as enabler to provoke change. So it was uttered in the opening of this very house, so that the responsible, the sensible choice becomes the desirable choice for everyone, and that's through design. And for that to happen, there's no doubt design needs to get very smarter very soon. And design, by definition, is an iterative process. It is a process of trial and error. A couple of months ago, Jeff and I were part of a podcast where he touched upon something really important. We are at a time where we need to start getting things right the first time around. And for that, we need to start working in a way where we rely heavily on data observation and research and make very precise and accurate interpretations of this data, so our designs become increasingly more fail-proof, flexible, thus future-proof as well. And we are at a very exciting time where we have the tools that are so advanced, so powerful, and so complex, we can incorporate them into our workflows, and now we have a chance to focus our lenses further into the future with so much clarity and precision, just to achieve that fail-proof design approach we have been striving for. Gehl and Atelier has just wrapped a project here in the UAE, harnessing the power of AI significantly in that project. At this point, I'm going to turn to Jeff to kick things off and ask him the most distilled version of the question as I possibly can. How do urban design and AI come together? Starting like.
Yeah, all right, that's a super easy starting point. Yeah. I'll maybe just start with a couple mindset frames that I think are important to consider, and maybe we can talk more about. For me, this first idea about AI, it's important to see how, or to say how I look at it at least, right? And so I think first, it's not just AI. There's AIs. There's many different forms of intelligence, not only in terms of the technology that we've been using for quite a long time, but also to think a lot about, human, machine, plant intelligence, and how we might be able to understand those different forms of intelligence in a better way. So for me, the first, as a sort of research-based designer, I'm really keen to understand how the actual technical form of artificial intelligence can help us to understand these different forms of intelligence that we see, again, in human, machines, and plants. I think cities are probably the perfect test bed for understanding that interaction, how the things that we build then shape the way that plant ecosystems and other life can thrive or not thrive, which in turn shape the way that we live and allows us to make new machines, et cetera. So it's a little bit abstract, but I hope this sort of frame at least maybe helps the rest of us, or at least me, think about that very large question. If I become a little bit more specific, just about, I think a way that using this frame of curiosity and trying to understand through knowledge. I'm not sure if you all have used, I'm sure many of you have, like, ChatGPT or other large language models. We all probably have different fun stories about how we've used it. I'm not sure how you've thought about it, but I was super excited just about the thought of like talking to this intelligence. I was brought back to, I'm 45 years old, so I thought back to the early 90s when I had my first internet connection. And for me, it was incredibly exciting to think, I can now connect. I could chat with people in Cleveland or I didn't even know that the Gulf existed then. So as an American, I was like Cleveland was like as far away as I got from where I grew up in Colorado. But I got excited about being able to have access to different people in different places. And I had that same sort of feeling when I tried ChatGPT about a year ago about access to different information and a new kind of conversation. And so I've been using these large language models as a way to have different conversations with this intelligence, right? And so asking a question like, I'm not sure if you know the philosopher Walter Benjamin, super interesting German philosopher, talked all about authenticity and how the craft of making something makes it feel real. I'm also a huge fan of Martin Luther King for many reasons, but most of which, he talks about how love is basically the thing that we need to be practicing all the time, and Martin Luther King practiced love even in the most extreme conditions. So I asked ChatGPT, like, what if Walter Benjamin and Martin Luther King designed a city? What would they, based on authenticity and love, what would be the sort of pillars of that? And so I tell you that just that little kind of simple story to say that's that type of curiosity or questioning and hopefully juxtaposing very different concepts from philosophy to city building, from advocacy and civic engagement to the way that we design things is something that, at the end of the day, if we take that lens, maybe that could guide sort of our thinking about AI and cities. That's that for now.
Okay. During our previous conversations, we talked about what makes a livable city. And it's much more than its physical components. It is, a city is a very complex, multi-layered construct. And one of these layers is, of course, public services. And when done right, public services increase the quality of life immensely. I would like to turn to Claudia now and ask about how AI can be used to improve public services.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I really would like to thank you for the invitation. I am very honored to be here with the co-panelists. It's very nice to meet Jeff and Liz and to see Victor again. So I would like to say that I have a bias because besides my work in the private sector, I used to work as a public servant. So my bias around how public services can provide well-being, it's very strong. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on how I ended up interested in AI. When we are from Costa Rica, and I had this opportunity to go to do a program in Cambridge. That's where I live right now. And I was invited to talk about, in a forum, about the future of city. And something that really was interesting for me was that in the conversations around future of city, I was pretty much the only Latin American in the crowd. And then I realized that when we have this intersectionality around using these incredible tools like technology, the reality is that there is a huge underrepresentation of different geographies. And then the products or the outcomes that we are going to have from these possible tools, the outcomes are going to be hugely biased. In my case, I am very interested on how we can find answers to very complex challenges that we are facing in urban planning. In Latin America, it's one of the most urbanized regions of the world, and the reality is that our urbanization has been very fast, urban sprawl, not much of a proper planning around it, and what has suffered is that you cannot catch up within urban sprawl. It's very hard to catch up with public services, right? If the city is growing so fast, public services are going to be in detriment. And then you have these amazing tools that could actually help to provide answers. There are several ways in how you can use artificial intelligence regarding land use and how you can try to avoid conflicts that currently we have in land use due to rapid growth in urbanization and other type of situations. But the reality is that more than delve into that there are many things. I am very much focused on transportation, which is a huge chaos in Latin America. In Costa Rica, it's also part of the biggest carbon footprint that we have. So transportation, it's a big area where you can use AI for understanding demand, real-time information for users. How can we tackle different type of transportation, which is the difference between interaction in demand in urban areas and rural areas, which is what I am focusing right now at MIT. Also, there is a lot of information that we can have in urban planning about risk assessment and climate that I think Liz is going to provide a lot more information. Energy efficiency, it's also a huge component to where we can use artificial intelligence for urban planning. But maybe what I would like to just complement to what Jeff was talking about is how are we going to provide solutions that are going to be inclusive, that are going to represent different types of geographies, and how are we understanding the bias that we are having in these tools? I am going to give you an example that I think it's interesting, but it's very explicit on what we're facing. I don't know if you know that corporate America, maybe Jeff knows about this. Corporate America uses artificial intelligence to filter job applications. And so if you get this first filter, probably you can get an interview with a person, like in-person interview. And this corporation, they started seeing that the profiles of the people that were arriving to the decision makers had the same profile. And they found out that the algorithm that was providing this first filter, since it was trained with the historical information from this corporation, the algorithm understood, based on this information and based on this training, that the best fit for a CEO in the company was male, white, from an elite Ivy League university, and polo player. And the reality is that we are having that in different sectors. So when we talk about urban design and urban planning, the reality is that if you don't have information, you are not going to be able to use artificial intelligence. So the conversation that needs to happen, it's completely different around artificial intelligence in Cambridge, where I am trying to work right now. And what will be the nuanced conversation that we will need to have in Latin America? What is the nuanced conversation that we need to have, for example, in Dubai, about how are we using AI? Is it possible to develop and deploy AI at the same way that it's being developed and deployed in the US? I don't know, probably not. Probably the information is different. In our case, lack of information, lack of data sets are not allowing us to really leverage on these tools. And the problem, and this is, I'm going to finish right now with this, the problem is that artificial intelligence is propelling huge solutions so fast that it also has the potential to have other geographies way behind. If we cannot use it in a global market, the inequality could be worsened. And I think I believe this is something that we need to start talking. I believe there is a lot of potentiality around urban planning and design with artificial intelligence, but the real question is, do we have access for everybody? Or are we leaving geographies, are we leaving countries, are we leaving people behind? And obviously there is the intersectionality around even the carbon footprint that AI has regarding greenhouse emissions. That is a different type of conversation, but it's also a good questioning because machine learning takes a lot of carbon footprint.
I think the word access is a great segue to turn to Victor to talk about accessibility and inclusivity and all your body of work and how you use AI for people to have access to all these services within a city and all the spaces that provide it.
Thank you. Well, I first want to thank the organizers because this is a conversation at a time that couldn't be more important. The world is facing tremendous sort of convulsions. That the planet needs us to amplify our intelligence. So AI isn't an artificial intelligence, it amplifies human intelligence. So what we heard before is the data sets that we use need to be representative of, even more so, of the people most at risk of being left out. So my story is quite simple. I'm another Latin American. I was born in Venezuela, but I was born into a world that wasn't designed for me. So I had to choose whether I was going to sit on the sidelines and feel like the obstacles were too much, or that I could have a role in reshaping the world. Understanding the obstacles almost as a systemic sort of opportunity for a transformation. And so I developed a career in public policy and public service. I helped negotiate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Over 16 years, I've been an advisor to the leadership in the UAE and in the region. I helped develop the Dubai Disability Strategy, which was part of the master plan of Dubai, and then worked in Abu Dhabi and on the federal government to bring some of these innovations around inclusive design and more integrated approaches to a coordinated public sector response to the diversity of bodies, the diversity of human experiences, and the diversity of age. So the high correlation between disability and age, the high correlation between proper urban design and the ability for women or parents to move around the city and feel like the city responds to their needs. So my unique perspective, both on the human rights and policy, but also understanding design as a way to sort of accelerate a mechanism to unlock human potential, all became sort of key ingredients to some of our work on innovation. My foundation has launched a 5-year initiative with a global advisory council on inclusive innovation, specifically looking at how we can leverage AI, not AI as artificial intelligence, but as access and inclusion. So technologies that can advance access and inclusion. And we did a very great project, a 3-year project with the CTO of the city of Amsterdam. And so the CTO, during the pandemic, started to leverage AI to understand which sidewalks in the city were wider than 2 meters, so that if people had the virus, we would know which sidewalks were not so crowded. And then he thought, what would it be like to use artificial intelligence to have greater insights, to amplify insights in the city, and how could we use them to leverage insights on accessibility? So we developed a project that uses machine vision and machine learning to basically see sidewalks, crosswalks, pedestrian rights of way, and identify barriers in cities to allow the city planners a way to remove those barriers, whether it's a tree or a bench or a lot of trash cans, or as the case in Amsterdam, a heck of a lot of bikes that get parked everywhere. Those barriers, unless they're understood and addressed, eliminate people's choices, eliminate people's agency, eliminate people's right to access the city on an equal basis with others. So I'm very excited today to give a pre-launch on what we are now launching next month, which is called the AI Playbook on Inclusive and Accessible Cities. So my foundation will launch the first ever how-to guide to apply AI in partnership with technology teams, city agencies, and local communities to basically have a roadmap to leverage AI, not just to optimize traffic, not just to understand pollution in a city, but really to make cities places where people feel like they belong. So leveraging innovation for inclusion is really how I think about AI, amplifying inclusion through these emerging technologies. So I invite you to join us because we launch more of these initiatives over the next few months.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to Liz to bring this to a climate angle. And I'm really curious to hear the current state of climate risk analysis, because as architects, this is something, and our urban planners, this is something we have been doing for centuries. People have been taking precautions against heat, rain, wind, flood, but we are at a stage where we need to excel at it using very advanced tools. And
well, thank you for having me, and I'll try not to be a downer, even though I'm on the risk side, and we tend to look at the world from that risk lens. So I have 20 years of experience in risk modeling in the insurance industry. And one of the things that we've done for a long time in insurance that I think a lot of people don't realize is we've used advanced data and analytics and machine learning technologies in order to get more precise and predictive on what a loss could look like at any property in the world. So if you just think about the insurance policy that you're buying for your house or your car or your business, the underwriter on the other side, he knows exactly what, or she knows exactly what frequency of flooding and extreme flooding you're going to experience. They know how likely it is that you will burn in a wildfire. They know how much heat that building's going to experience over time. And they build that insight into coming up with the premium that they'll charge you. This data exists and it's used already to decide how much your risk costs. Individuals and consumers, though, and even corporations, they don't have access to the same information. They're not using it in a consistent way across our economy and our kind of system of decision-making related to climate in a way that helps them get access to that same information. And so at Aon, we're a risk broker. So we sit between our clients and risk capital. And we really know and understand exactly how capital providers in the risk space think about this cost and this loss potential. And so we really do feel that it's an opportunity for the insurance industry to play a leadership role to help communities, city planners, construction companies, corporate finance lenders, mortgage lenders, get access to this information so they can make better decisions. And I'll give you guys some examples of the type of work that we're doing. One is a very real example in California. So in 2017 and 2018, the state of California in the US experienced 2 seasons of very extreme wildfire loss. California is a massively profitable market in general for the insurance industry. But in those 2 years, the losses that the insurance industry paid out for the fires wiped out 20 years of profit. So almost immediately they had to restructure their portfolios, reprice their portfolios, and balance things out so they could regain that profit back. And the surprising thing about one of the fires I think a lot of people don't know, the city of Paradise, which is up in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. It's a beautiful town, a beautiful community, out in the trees, up in the mountains, one access road in and out of the town. Very beautiful construction, cedar planks on the siding of the houses, wood mulch around the side of every house. They had a city mandate, actually, that prohibited people from cutting down trees. They had to get special planning permission from the community in order to cut down a tree or clear brush out because the community really valued the nature and the beauty of the nature. But what they missed was an understanding of the risk and that the balance between beauty offset the actual risk that they were experiencing. And in my opinion, personal opinion, they should have known better. Paradise fire that occurred in 2018, the footprint of that fire is almost identical to a fire that happened back in 2003. So the fire that occurred in Paradise, it had happened before. There weren't as many buildings there. It was a smaller community. The loss was not that significant. But it just shows how a lack of that community planning ahead of time and having access to the level of information that catastrophe models and climate models can give you can lead you down a path where you're making an incorrect risk assessment. And now what's happening in California is insurance has retracted. The availability of insurance is diminishing in high-risk areas. It's becoming prohibitively expensive for homeowners to get access to insurance. And in the US, if you don't have proof of a homeowner's insurance policy, you cannot get a mortgage. You cannot buy a home. So this is a real problem for people who are living in this area right now, and they don't have too many options. They can, leave. They can default on their mortgage and leave. They can get access to a less efficient policy that's provided by the state. But one thing that's emerging that is really exciting is that fire risk is not a single house risk. Fire risk is a community risk, because how good your neighbors are at protecting their home from being burned will have an impact on how likely it is your house will be burned. And so communities are starting to put into place planning around with a risk-based lens that balances the desire for nature, the desire for beautiful cedar plank siding, with more reasonable and resilient decisions around how they build their homes. And when they do that, what the insurance analytics that we provide can tell communities is exactly to the dollar how much risk avoidance or loss avoidance that investment will make. And then the insurance industries can come in and actually start writing business there again. So this balance and connection between risk takers and communities is getting closer and closer together in order to solve this really significant challenge in an isolated market. But it's a story that we see repeated over and over and over again. Parts of the world that experience extreme flooding often have a very hard time getting insurance. If you see areas of chronic heat or increasing frequency of hurricane activity, insurance is going to continue to be a challenging product to get. But because we're relying on highly detailed climate data, we can quantify the benefit of resilience investment. And we can provide that quantification through premium reduction and incentivization to make an investment into resilience. But how are we actually using AI? So that's the point of this panel. I'm not an AI expert, but I can tell you how we're starting to use it at Aon, because it helps us solve that exact problem. So we did work last year for a large mortgage provider, one of the largest in the US. And they wanted us to look at their mortgage portfolio and tell them, what's my climate risk in this portfolio? How likely is it that the homeowners that I underwrite will experience losses from climate change? So we gathered all of their information, we ran it against all of our models, and we came back with some answers and some range of results. But one of the things that we found was that the data that they gave us was completely inefficient for physical risk modeling. So the fundamentals of climate risk modeling is that you have a house or a building like this, and you tell the model, what is this building made of? It's 2 stories, looks like it's a metal frame, light metal construction. This would perform very badly in an extreme wind event. But you put that information in, it's 2 stories with a lofted area. You tell it that, you tell it how old the building is. If you're in a flood-exposed area, you want to know if there's a basement, what kind of windows are on the building, how resilient are they to wind speeds, what's the roof made of, how old is the roof, how's it attached to the building. Those things really matter, and they have an impact on the loss that the model spits out, which has an impact on how much premium you have to pay. It has an impact on whether or not a mortgage lender would give you a loan potentially. But banks don't collect that information, because none of that data affects the credit score that they're using, or your credit that they're using to come up with whether or not they'll price your mortgage, whether or not they'll underwrite you and give you a loan. So what we're trying to do is take AI and create actually synthetic data sets. You can tell some of these modules about part of the country, about a part of the world. You can tell it some pieces of information, and then it can actually create a data set for you and say, well, based on everything we know in the world, basically everything we know on the internet is how these models learn. We can tell you with pretty good certainty exactly what's in this house. It probably has a lofted space. It's probably 2 stories tall. It probably has a window up there. And that way we can actually feed that information into the mortgage lender who wasn't collecting it. And now they have better data and better information around what their climate risk is. So that's one way in which we're using AI. And I think it's really critical to get that kind of information much closer to the designing and planning phase, because it can help people make decisions about whether or not they should build a building of a certain type of construction, a certain type of material, or to a certain level of resiliency. And we can tell you what the exact cost benefit of doing that will be. And it's something that I think we're really trying to work on a lot more, and we're seeing a lot more of our clients ingest and use this data in that way specifically. So.
Thank you for that. One emerging topic is the availability of data, it seems, whether depending on its existence or accessibility. So, Jeff, would you mind contributing to that, being very active in the urban design practice itself? How do you collect the data? How do you search for it? How do you find it? And then how do you use it? And how does AI play into that?
I mean, super interesting, I think, to see these different perspectives in terms of what's included and what's not. And I can't help but kind of answer that question a little bit, just reflecting on, some of the stories here. I think, Victor talking, and I could almost see your eyes going when Liz was talking about what data is available, and realizing that you're already very, very biased about how you understand a city, depending on from what perspective you've been able to take into it, right? Not only from an accessibility perspective, but also the fire story. Thinking about, well, back to my point about, nature intelligence or plant intelligence, if we were more aware of what forests and these areas needed, then we would treat them in our way that we settle in them in a very different way. And exactly, so there's so a lot to think about that. But I mean, I think the way that we've typically tried to get data has been very much about meeting people where they are. And of course, there's limits to that, because if you don't have access to a place, well, then it's hard for us to observe you using the space, right? But we are trying to note when we go and understand who is present, also who is not there. So also, either what user groups, or what forms of nature, or what forms of technology are present, but also what's not present. So I think the ability to essentially observe is sort of the old school kind of ethnographic approach that we deploy. And of course, AI can amplify that. I'm stealing all of your good terms, Victor. Amplifying that ability to see by essentially putting ourselves in other people's perspectives, being able to have a macro view of cities and hopefully understand what's going on there in a much more hopefully holistic and all-encompassing way. But again, I can't help but going back to this risk of amplifying maybe some of the wrong things, or doing some of the wrong stuff faster and bigger, and even larger distortions being potentially created by that. So I think the challenge that we have with AI, back to this idea of curiosity of intelligence, of understanding multiple forms of intelligence, and then really hopefully using that technology to not only do what we've already done, better or worse, but to hopefully seek new types of insights, new types of understanding, new types of connections between people, places, and things that can give us truly new possibilities, right? And maybe I'll bring it down. I know I'm very philosophical today, but if I try to bring it down to sort of one example, I think there's a lot of work going into things like weather system patterns and adaptation to it, right? And actually, I think we need to, it's really exciting to think about AI helping us understand adaptation in a much, much more rich and focused way. And I would love to not only use technology to find out how we do net zero buildings and take carbon out of things, but how we're much more specific about how we're going to live in cities of the future that are hotter and are wetter, that hopefully could be more inclusive and accessible. And I think the ability to use technology to understand that condition that we're going to be living with in the next 20 or 30 years and designing for it in a much more specific way, shifting from mitigation to adaptation in terms of our focus is going to be key as we go forward.
I can respond
Please.
just very quickly. One of the things that each panelist today described is that none of us have all of the pieces, right? None of us have the comprehensive set of puzzle pieces that come together. Anybody that thinks that they know what the future looks like is lying. Anybody that thinks they know that they can put together a perfect plan is lying. The only thing we can do is try our best to ensure, with humility, that we are aware of what the risks are, that we are aware of who's not adequately represented, or that we're aware that there are gaps. So I think having awareness of the limitations and the failures or the shortcomings of us ourselves as humans and our egos, right, and our biases become really instrumental to that having authentic and meaningful conversations, like you said, by combining and synthesizing risk mitigating perspective with public sector innovators, with private sector capital, with technology that empowers underrepresented groups, really thinking holistically about that transformation can only happen with a kind of consortium like this. Because Q House has these very unique and creative companies that each bring niche perspectives. This panel has a unique perspective. What would it look like for us to continue this conversation from this panel in future bids or in future design projects so that we complement a holistic approach? And I think a governance perspective, in terms of the way we spend money, the public sector should be very explicit that they want coalitions or consortiums that really complement each other around inclusion, innovation, climate, nature capital, all of these things, so that it really becomes a way to mitigate the risks and having the most broad and integrated data sets so that we're not perpetuating the systemic failures of the past. So I'm hopeful, but it really requires a new governance model for consistent collaborations. Sure.
Just I would like to add to what Victor was saying, because I think it's important that not necessarily all of the design sector, but sometimes designers and planners, we don't like, because of our nature, we don't like to get involved into politics, so to speak. But the reality is that careless policy making from the national, local governments can really lead us to worsen the structural inequalities around the use of technology or technologically enhanced solutions. So policy and regulation, it's going to be very, very important. Something that I could see as a warning, because again, AI is a tool. So you can use it in different ways. It's not necessarily good or bad, it's just a tool. It's a powerful tool that can actually help us close gaps more efficiently, more rapidly, if well used. I do believe that it needs to be along with regulation. Some people may think just good practices and guidelines. I do believe that regulation is important. So we need different sectors need to get closer to policymakers to create these regulatory frameworks as representative as possible. And sometimes I think people feel very intimidated. If you don't have a data scientist background or maybe a computer science background, people don't get closer to these discussions and to these debates. That's the first thing, just adding to your comment. And the second one is that regarding urban planning, and even in different other sectors, since this tool, it's having such a powerful forecasting and predictive abilities. The reality also is that we are going to have, that's why regulation is so important, we are going to have a lot of information that could end up in a new AI era of redlining in urban planning. Because if you have a prediction of where the crime is going to be, how the home value it's going to get, where you're going to have more risk in terms of forecasting, weather forecasting, and other type of risk assessments. The reality is that it will be, if not properly understood and used, it could end up on a different type of redlining in terms of urban planning. So I think the invitation is that we need as broader conversation as possible, and we need to incorporate different voices, not only in terms of different realities, economies, geographies, but I do think that we need to incorporate the discussion, different voices in terms of different sectors. Culture, humanities, etc., needs to be part of this conversation because they have a lot to say around what we could do and we should do with this tool.
I think you can tell I'm jumping up over here because what you just described in terms of the regulatory necessity to really come in and help set guidelines, I mean, it's already happening. Insurance pricing is highly regulated. So an insurance company that's trying to get, right homeowners business in the U.S. has to pass those rates through an insurance regulator in their state. And the use of AI is causing a significant amount of concern. For one, it's illegal to price in your rating plans against certain protected classes. But when you stick a whole bunch of data into an AI model, it's really hard to know what's driving the outcome. I mean, that's the point of the model. It learns, it adapts, and it evolves. But when you get a result out and you're looking at it and you see something like, oh, it's showing that I'm more risky in this area and maybe it's for a reason that is a protected class, you actually can't find the line of code and change it. You can't. And so there's a ton of work, if insurance companies want to use the powerful and positive sides of AI, they have to be able to audit the process. And so it's kind of a restricted AI approach, a restricted model approach in order to prevent those things from coming out. And it's being, there will be regulation around it. And I think another thing I wanted to just call on some of the other comments on the panelists too is one way that this becomes really, really important and tangible is in simple things like building codes and building code design. Hurricane Michael made landfall in Florida, the panhandle of Florida, 4 years ago. It was a really significantly large event. The state of Florida in the United States has some of the best building code design in the world for hurricanes. The houses are built to be able to withstand extreme winds, except for the panhandle. And when Hurricane Michael made landfall, you could see pictures of just completely wiped out houses, all from the first ones on the beach all the way back about 4 or 5 blocks. The houses on the front were washed away by the storm surge, and then the debris went and knocked the house down behind it and knocked down the house behind it, and it was just completely leveled. Except for one house there was one house on Mexico City Beach that was there, and where the owner had decided on his own to build to a higher standard than the Panhandle. He used the building codes from Southern Florida, from Miami, and it cost him a lot more. And he had a hard time finding contractors to actually agree to do it because it drove the cost up so much. And you had to have special skill to be able to build to that higher standard. But they chose to do it for their own reasons. They were risk-minded people. And the house stood. It was the only house on the entire beachfront property that had very, very minimal damage. And when the rest of the community had to rebuild from scratch, this one house was able to withstand it. So it proves that we know how to build buildings that can be resilient. We know how to create stronger structures against the perils that we face. But you have to get close to policymakers. You have to get that information embedded into building codes, which I'm not an engineer, but they are extremely hard to read, very difficult to change, cumbersome documents, and we have to get the information in there and passed into law in order to make any kind of change, because we can't rely on the one person who is risk-minded and risk-averse to make that investment on their own. Not everybody has the means to do that. Not everybody has the knowledge to do that, but it can have a really big impact, and it's something that when we're talking across groups like this, you actually can figure out, oh, that's what's needed. How do we embed that understanding, that engineering knowledge from a resiliency standpoint into the day-to-day tactical workflows that'll lead to a different outcome?
Just to add something to your point, because I completely agree, transparency. Yeah. We don't get enough transparency in certain models, leading to the black box effect. And there is also the white box, which is we don't need necessarily AI for every answer. There is good old best practices that even we as urban planners know that we don't need to ask AI. So what are we asking is as important as the outcomes that AI could provide. And last point regarding inputs, there is so few information regarding, for example, traditional knowledge for different cultures within the information that it's trained in these models, that we are lacking a huge amount of information and knowledge that sometimes is more adaptive to the challenges, to the multifaceted challenges that we are having in climate change, that AI is not able to grasp because they are not there yet. So let's not forget the good old practices, and that artificial intelligence and techno-solutionism is not the answer to everything. And there is common sense in good design also.
I would say the answer lies with you guys. Like, we're not the answer. Like, you guys in the audience are going to confront decisions day to day about your communities, about your places of employment, about your children's schools. How are you understanding the way technology is going to be building and being used across the entire community that you live? So educating yourselves, working with each other, and then interacting with organizations in your communities to think about the emerging capabilities of artificial intelligence will really become your responsibility. You can't just say it's somebody else's choice. It's all of our collective choices that are going to build a future that's more resilient and inclusive, and whether we use artificial intelligence correctly or not will also be your choice. So I want to encourage you all to spend time speaking to each other after the sessions and get to build a network of people thinking about AI in the built environment, because it really starts with those kinds of relationships. So I want to make one last plug. If you're here on Friday, the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government will host a policy discussion around AI and its use for building inclusive cities. So MC, can you raise your hands? So MC is working with me, so if you'd like to continue to learn about this, it's an issue that you care about from a policy perspective, you can give your information to MC, and she'll send you a private invitation with other government leaders that are thinking about addressing the risks and the policy opportunities to leverage this specific dimension. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for making this the easiest event of my entire career, answering my follow-up questions without me asking them. Thank you so much. I love where we have arrived, and seems to me it is every panel event or congress I have attended in the last few years, we keep arriving here. We talk about design, how it can be improved, what design can do. Design can do anything, but what to do with that piece of design is all that matters. Erasing the word competition completely from our vocabulary. Collaboration is key. I love when policymakers and designers come together. It is all about policymaking. It is all about the foundation of how we collaborate and how we bring ideas together. Like Victor said, asking questions and fighting about how we bring everything together, and with the intention of creating something sustainable and very healthy for all of our futures. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to collaborate. I agree completely, none of us has the entire set. We all have pieces to bring, and they fit each other perfectly. And it's only a matter of having the resilience and the patience to figure out how they all come together. And we for one, are looking forward to that entirely. We're 5 minutes past our curfew, but I think we may have time for 1 or 2 questions from the room, if you have them. Are we allowed 5 minutes? Sure. If not, yeah, we do.
Thank you. My question goes mainly towards Liz and the building codes. We also have seen that, for example, not only climate catastrophes, but also natural disasters are increasing. This is also assumed to be associated with the global climate crisis. Earthquakes, like we saw earlier in Turkey or in Morocco, are like killing millions of people. And with regards to the building codes, here again, the regulation is there. Like, we know how to build earthquake-resilient buildings, but still, there is a lot of corruption. And the building codes are not being followed. And what I would like to also hear your feedback on is how we can leverage AI and urban design to prevent corruption and protect the rights of the people living in these spaces.
That's a fantastic question, and certainly is very relevant, especially when you think about Turkey and Haiti, where there was a massive earthquake, maybe almost 10 years ago now, and a huge amount of corruption in where the money has been funneled and siphoned off to, and not rebuilding back in a better way. So corruption is absolutely an issue. I'm sure there's solutions around AI, but maybe what I can say outside of AI is actually this is an area where the insurance market and kind of global aid societies work together to create more accountability. So insurers deal with fraud all the time already. They have pretty sophisticated models that they're applying for really detecting fraud in day-to-day types of claims. So like auto, most US insurance carriers are already using AI to try to detect fraud in an auto claim. So if there's an accident or a claim that comes in, they can really quickly decide this is a fraudulent claim without a person looking at it. So it's a question of scale, and then it's a question of how do you create a similar type of process outside of that highly regulated, sophisticated world of US auto into some of the more challenging parts of the world. But monies are tied to the ability for organizations to prove loss. And there are ways that you can build into your policies wording around how do you build it back in a better way. Build back better is something that is specifically targeted to the insurance industry. What it means is when a house blows down or there's a loss, you're not going to the concept of insurance at its core is you are made whole. They give you the cost of what you lost. That doesn't really help you if you're trying to create something that's more resilient because it costs more. So there's a ton of work going on to figure out how do we put into policies wording around if you show that you're a good risk, if you show that you're making investments in your home and you're being a good risk manager, that actually you can get access to more funds when there's an event. And you can build back in a more resilient way because we're recognizing that you need to be able to do that. There's a lot of barriers. One is cost, and the other is education. I'm sure AI could help us speed that up.
Just wanted to point out a huge opportunity regarding transparency and accountability, but also a risk. The opportunity for me will be that there is a lot that could be done in terms of direct participation and transparency, for example, for budget allocation, for organizations, local governments, even national governments, if you get a higher ambition. So I think that is an interesting path that has its challenges, but it allowed to provide agency to people regarding processes at the same time as transparency on how those processes and the decision-making has been made. That is an opportunity. A risk that I'm starting to see in certain areas is that with generative AI, you can also make or translate certain policies to communities in a way that you could also manipulate different type of policies. It's going to be very easy to provide a vision, literally an image, that could misinformed and could be misleading. So I think there is also a huge risk around how are we going to use this tool to communication strategies that could also be very manipulating, right? So it's a huge opportunity at a certain way, but we need to educate, like digitally educate communities in order to avoid those misleading also kind of opportunities for different people.
If there are no closing remarks, that's the end of our session. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for listening.